Hello everyone, this is Maitri Bharadwaj, and today I'm going to start the topic generation and conduction of nerve impulse. This topic is quietly not much theoretical, but this topic is the topic that you have to understand. Okay, the concept is there. So, what is written over here? Neurons are excitable cells because their membranes are in polarized state. Do you know why the membranes of the neuron is polarized? Different types of ion channels are present on the neural membrane. These ion channels are selectively permeable to different ions. When a neuron is not conducting an impulse, that is, resting, the axonal membrane is comparatively more permeable to potassium ions, nearly impermeable to sodium ions. Similarly, the membrane is impermeable to negatively charged proteins present in the exoplasm. So, this was your diagram. This you can see. This was the axon, and this is the end. The synaptic knobs are present. So the portion inside this axon is called as the exoplasm portion, and the exoplasm portion you will find that the potassium ions are present, negatively charged proteins are present, and sodium ions are present. At the resting phase, when there is no impulse, means there is no conduction of any impulse, then at that time the movement of only potassium ions takes place through the ion channels, whereas the sodium ions, they are quite impermeable, and even the negatively charged proteins, they are also impermeable. So the ion channels are present and sodium, they move out, right? Similarly, the membrane is impermeable to negatively charged proteins present in the exoplasm. Consequently, the exoplasm inside the axon contain a high concentration of potassium ions and negatively charged proteins and low concentration of sodium ions. So at the time of the rest, when there is no conduction of impulse, the amount of the potassium ion, it moves from the outer medium to the exoplasm. So the amount of the potassium ions in the exoplasm is quite high in with respect to that of the negatively charged proteins and the Na positives ions. In contrast, the fluid outside the axon contains a very low concentration of potassium ions and a high concentration of sodium ions, and thus forms a concentration gradient. Yes, it will form a concentration gradient because in the exoplasm the amount of potassium is high, whereas in the outer medium it is low. So obviously the flow of the potassium ions at the time of the conduction of impulse, it will be from a high concentration gradient to a very low concentration gradient, that is from the exoplasm to the outer medium, right? And vice versa is applicable for the sodium ions, because sodium ions at the time of the rest is quite very low, high in the outer medium, right? So we can say that there is a formation of the concentration gradient. These ionic gradients across the resting membrane are maintained by the active transport of ions by sodium potassium pump, which transport the three sodium ions outward for two potassium ions into the cells. So at the conduction time, the three Na positive ions, they will move outward, and two potassium ions, they will move into the cells. So पहले क्या था कि amount of the potassium ion was quite high in the exoplasm. So towards the inner side there will be a positive charge, and in the outer side there will be a negative charge. But when the conduction takes place, three sodium ions, they will move outward, and two potassium ions, they will move in. So the charges, they will be exchanged, means in the exoplasm it will become negative, and outside that it will be positive. As a result, the outer surface of axonal membrane become positive. यही मैं कह रही हूँ, while its inner surface is negative, and therefore it is polarized. So this is a polarized state. The electric potential difference across the resting plasma membrane is called as the resting potential. You might be curious to know about the mechanism of generation of nerve impulse and its conduction along an axon. When a stimulus is applied at a site, see a point A. This is your point A. This one. When So when a stimulus is applied at a site A on the membrane at the site A becomes freely permeable to sodium ions, and this leads to a rapid influx of sodium ions from outside to inside. So rapid influx of sodium ions takes place by the reversal of polarity at that site. That is, the outer surface of the membrane becomes negatively charged and inner side becomes positively charged. The polarity of the membrane at the site A is thus reversed and hence depolarized. Because the polarity is being changed, so it becomes depolarized. Means positive का negative हो गया, negative का positive हो गया. The electric potential difference across the plasma membrane at site A is called as the action potential. So जो वही site A पर थे, तो यहाँ पर जो potential था at this point, the potential that was present over here at this point is called as the electric action potential. Okay, which is in fact termed as the nerve impulse. At the site immediately ahead of the axon, that is site B, is positively charged. यहाँ पर देख ही सकते हैं, यहाँ पर आपको दिख रहा है नेगेटिव था बाहर में, अंदर में पॉजिटिव था क्योंकि पोटेशियम आयन अंदर में ज्यादा था. फिर जैसे ही आप बी का देखोगे, यहाँ पे ऑपोजिट है, मतलब कि यहाँ पर तो एक्शन पोटेंशियल कंडक्ट हो रहा है, ये आपका रेस्टिंग स्टेट पे है, क्योंकि जो सोडियम आयंस हैं अंदर में कम थे एक्सोप्लाज्म में, क्योंकि और बाहर में ज्यादा थे सोडियम आयंस. तो सोडियम आयंस कहाँ ट्रैवल करेंगे अकॉर्डिंग टू कंसंट्रेशन ग्रेडियंट, बाहर से अंदर के साइड एक्सोप्लाज्म में जाएंगे. तो उसकी वजह से यहाँ पर अंदर के साइड पॉजिटिव हो जाएगा क्योंकि 3 सोडियम आयंस आ रहे हैं और 2 पोटेशियम आयंस उसके रिस्पेक्ट में जा रहे हैं बाहर. और ये जो ये बगल वाला है, ये सारी जो है ये आपका रेस्टिंग स्टेट है और ये आपका एक्शन पोटेंशियल वाला साइट है. समझे? Okay, so on the outer surface, the current flows from site B to site A to complete the circuit of the current flow. Hence, the polarity at the site is reversed and the action potential is generated at site B. और फिर ये travel करता है. कैसे travel करता है कि हमेशा ये positive to negative जाएगा. तो बाहर के साइड आपको दिख रहा है ये positive से negative जाएगा, current flow होगा इस साइड, बाहर के साइड, और अंदर के साइड भी पॉजिटिव से नेगेटिव जाएगा. तो अंदर के साइड एक्सोप्लाज्म में A2B जाएगा और बाहर के साइड वो B2A जाएगा और फिर B में आ जाएगा, ये एक्शन पोटेंशियल जनरेट हो जाएगा. Thus, impulse of the action potential generated at site A arrives at B. The sequence is repeated along the length of the axon and consequently, the impulse is conducted. The rise in the stimulus induced permeability to sodium ions is extremely short-lived. और ये बिल्कुल बहुत छोटा होता है, बहुत ही कम समय के लिए होता है, कुछ मिली सेकेंड्स के लिए. It is quickly followed by the rise in permeability of sodium to the potassium ions. Within a fraction of seconds, potassium diffuses outside the membrane and restores the resting potential of the membrane at the site of excitation, and the fiber becomes once more responsive to the further stimulation. तो ये पूरा प्रोसेस था कंडक्शन ऑफ इम्पल्स का. ठीक है, अब नेक्स्ट है, next is about the transmission of impulse. A nerve impulse is transmitted from one neuron to another through the junction called as synapses. तो जो पोर्शन होता है एक साइनेप्टिक नॉब ऑफ द एक्सॉन और दूसरा डेंड्राइट के बीच में, उसको साइनाप्स कहते हैं. उन दोनों के बीच का जो एरिया होता है, जो स्पेस होता है, दैट जंक्शन इज कॉल्ड एज द साइनाप्स. A synapse is formed by the membrane of presynaptic neuron and the postsynaptic neuron, which may or may not be separated by a gap which is called as synaptic cleft. तो synapse में दो न्यूरॉन्स के बीच का एक प्री साइनेप्टिक न्यूरॉन होगा एक का, और दूसरे का पोस्ट साइनेप्टिक न्यूरॉन होगा, मेम्ब्रेन होंगे, और उन दोनों के जो स्पेस होता है उन दोनों के बीच में, उसको साइनाप्स कहते हैं. कभी कभी इन दोनों के बीच में गैप होता है और कभी कभी नहीं होता है. तो द गैप which is present, that is called as your synaptic cleft. Now there are two type of synapses. One is your electric synapse, second is your chemical synapse. ठीक है. An electric synapse में क्या होता है, the membrane of the pre and the post synaptic neuron are in very close proximity, means the gap between them is absent. Electric current can flow directly from one neuron into the other. Okay, so electric current can flow directly, so the gap is absent, right? Transmission of impulse across the electric very similar to the impulse conduction along a